You're having the worst day of your life. Maybe someone you loved died. Maybe you just got news that changed everything. Maybe you're sitting on the kitchen floor at 2 in the morning for no reason you can explain, and you can't stop crying. You haven't said a word. The house is silent. You are falling apart quietly, in the dark, and you are entirely alone. Or at least, you think you are. Then, your dog walks over, puts their head in your lap, and just stays there. They didn't hear a phone call. They didn't see the news. Somehow, through the walls and the silence, they knew. So the question is, did they actually know? Or did you just need them to? Most of us like to think our pets have a kind of emotional magic, a spiritual connection that lets them see into our souls. But the reality is much more settling and much more profound than magic. It turns out your dog isn't just vaguely sensing that something is off. They are reading a biological signature that is as clear to them as a flashing red light. They knew you were sad before you even processed it yourself. Because to an animal, your sorrow isn't an internal secret. It's a physical fact. Let's start with what a dog can physically detect, because it is more high resolution than most people realize. When you are devastated, your body doesn't just produce tears. Your internal chemistry undergoes a massive, immediate shift. Your breathing patterns change, your heart rate fluctuates, and your primary stress hormone, cortisol, floods your bloodstream. That cortisol eventually exits your body through your sweat and your breath. To you, that shift is invisible. To a dog, it is a smell. A dog's nose contains around 300 million olfactory receptors. Humans have about 6 million. The part of their brain dedicated to analyzing those smells is, proportionally, 40 times larger than yours. We already know that dogs can detect cancer cells in human tissue, or smell a change in blood sugar before a diabetic goes into a seizure. So, when your cortisol spikes because you are sitting on that kitchen floor, you are essentially outputting a chemical alarm. Your dog isn't guessing that you're upset. They are standing in a cloud of your distress. They are reading the air, and the air is telling them that the person they depend on is in trouble. But smelling stress is one thing. Actually caring about it is another. A skeptic might argue that your dog has simply learned a routine. You cry, you stay still, and they've learned that if they put their head on your lap, they get a pat or a kind word. It's a pattern, not empathy. That is the standard scientific argument for why animals comfort us. Except, a 2012 study out of the University of London found a way to break that argument. The researchers had people either cry, hum, or talk normally in a room while a dog watched. The dogs didn't just respond to their owners, they responded to total strangers. When a human they had never met before started to cry, almost every dog in the study approached them. They didn't just sniff around, they made physical contact, and they almost always oriented their bodies toward the person in distress. Most importantly, they did it with submissive body language. Heads low, tails tucked, movements slow and quiet. When the humans hummed an unusual tune, the dogs were curious, but they didn't offer comfort. They could tell the difference between a strange sound and human pain. Because the dogs had no history with these strangers, there was no learned pattern to follow. There was no reward waiting for them. There was only a signal of suffering, and a choice to move toward it rather than away from it. Behavioral scientists describe this as an empathic response. The dog wasn't just reacting to something strange, they were reacting to something sad. Horses are even harder to dismiss as simple pattern matchers. In 2018, researchers at the University of Sussex took this further by testing emotional literacy. They showed horses large photographs of human faces, some angry, some happy, and then played a recording of a human voice. But they mismatched the signals. They would play a happy, cheerful voice while showing a picture of an angry face. The horses didn't just ignore it. Their heart rates spiked. They turned their heads to look at the angry image with their left eye, a specific behavior in horses associated with processing negative or threatening stimuli in the brain. They were cross-referencing what they saw with what they heard in real time, and they were getting stressed because the signals didn't align. They weren't just seeing a face. They were reading an intent. Horses have lived alongside humans for about 6,000 years, which is long enough for them to have developed a kind of emotional Rosetta Stone for our species. They aren't just detecting your mood. In a very real sense, they have learned to speak the language of your face. Cats, of course, make the whole narrative more complicated. The standard reputation is that cats are aloof, self-serving, and largely indifferent to human drama. And behaviorally, that is often accurate. A cat isn't going to sprint across the room to comfort a crying stranger. But a 2015 study out of Oakland University found that cats have a much more selective kind of emotional literacy. Researchers found that cats could distinguish between their owner's happy and angry expressions, but they largely ignored the emotions of strangers. When their owner looked distressed, the cats didn't necessarily comfort them in the way a dog would, but they changed their behavior. They sought more proximity, staying closer to the upset owner while remaining quieter and less demanding. They weren't responding to human emotion in general. They were responding specifically to their human's emotion. It wasn't a global reflex. It was a relationship. The cat may not feel a need to save the world, but it is intensely aware of the emotional weather inside its own territory. If we move away from our homes and into the wild, we find that this instinct to recognize and respond to pain is even more deeply rooted. In elephant society, consolation is a foundation of survival. When a member of the herd is distressed, whether they've been injured, frightened by a predator, or are grieving a lost calf, other elephants respond with a specific set of behaviors. They rumble softly at a low frequency that can be felt through the ground. They use their trunks to gently touch the distressed animal's face and mouth. They position their massive bodies in a protective circle around them. In 2014, a team of researchers in Thailand documented these responses and found they were consistent and immediate. Even the young elephants did it. This wasn't a skill that took decades to learn. It appeared to be a preloaded biological program. Some form of the instinct to recognize and respond to suffering is built into the mammalian brain at a level that doesn't require a single day of training. So, why would evolution do this? Caring about someone else's pain is biologically expensive. It takes time you could be using to find food. It pulls you toward potential danger. It uses energy. From a cold, survival of the fittest standpoint, it makes no sense to comfort something that isn't you. But for social animals, emotional sensitivity isn't a soft personality trait. It's biological infrastructure. A herd with no awareness of each other's distress falls apart the second a threat appears. A pack that can't detect when a member is hurting loses the cohesion it needs to hunt and protect. The ability to read pain in others, to respond to it, and to stay near it, that is a survival tool as vital as a claw or a tooth. Over millions of years, for certain species, the choice to comfort became as automatic as breathing. But here is where the science hits a wall. None of that infrastructure theory tells us what it actually feels like to be the dog with its head in your lap. We can measure the cortisol in your sweat. We can track the heart rate of the horse. We can document that elephants respond differently to sadness than to any other stimulus. What we can't do is get inside their subjective experience and find out whether there is something happening there that resembles what you feel when someone you love is hurting. Some researchers believe asking that question is a mistake. They argue that we are just projecting human feelings onto creatures that are fundamentally different from us, that we are falling for a biological illusion. But others think that refusing to ask it is its own kind of bias, an assumption that the experience of feeling is a human monopoly. The honest answer is that nobody knows. We don't know if the dog feels pity, or if the elephant feels grief, or if they are both just moving through a cascade of evolved reflexes that happens to produce the same result. However, the fact that we can't prove the feeling doesn't change the outcome. The dog that walked over to you on the kitchen floor processed your chemistry, read your body language from across the room, and made a choice to stay with you. Whether that required an internal theater of empathy, or whether it was a series of ancient gears turning in their brain, the result was the same. You were suffering, and they came. Maybe the more important question isn't whether they understand what sadness is. Maybe it's what it means that across dozens of species and millions of years of evolution, the instinct to move towards something in pain rather than away from it kept getting passed down. In a world defined by the survival of the fittest, the urge to stay with the weak and the hurting kept winning. It kept surviving. Whatever that instinct is, it decided you were worth staying for. It's not a feeling you can measure in a lab. It's not a thought you can see on a brain scan. It is just a choice, made quietly, over and over again, by every species that ever learned how to live in a group. That choice survived everything: the ice ages, the predators, the endless competition of nature. And it is still here, sitting right next to you in the dark. We often feel like our inner lives are private, that no one can ever truly know what it feels like to be us. But the animals in our lives remind us that we aren't nearly as alone as we think. We are constantly outputting a broadcast of our internal state, and they are constantly receiving it. We are part of a massive chemical and emotional conversation that has been happening since before humans had words. The dog on the kitchen floor isn't performing a miracle. They are doing something much more impressive. They are being a social animal. They are using their 300 million receptors and their 6,000 years of history to tell you that the group is still together. They are telling you that the infrastructure hasn't broken. So, do they know you're sad? Science says they know your heart rate is up. They know your cortisol is spiking. They know your face is making a shape that indicates a threat or a loss. They know your voice has hit a frequency of distress. But perhaps we are the ones who are overcomplicating it. We want to know if they know, but they are already doing the only thing that matters. They are staying. And in a world that is often fast, loud, and indifferent, maybe that is the only definition of knowing that counts. The choice to not walk away is the most profound thing any creature can offer another. It is the biological proof that we are not meant to suffer in silence. The magic isn't that they can read your soul. The magic is that evolution decided that your sorrow was a signal worth answering. The next time you feel a head on your lap or a soft rumble from a giant, don't worry about whether they understand the details of your life. Just realize that you are being seen by a sensor that is more ancient than your own language. You are being held in place by a biological law that says no member of the pack should have to fall apart alone. You aren't just a person crying on a floor. You are a biological signal that has just been answered. And as long as they are sitting there, the ancient code is working. You are still part of the group. And for a social animal, that is the only thing that has ever really mattered.